Welcome to another episode of Politics Done Right. Today, I'm honored to have the former mayor of Charlotte, Jennifer Roberts. As you guys know, mayors are where things happen. And in her case, things happened. Mayor Roberts, how are you doing today?
I am doing great, and I hope that everyone is safe and healthy because we know a lot of people are in tough times right now, and just want to take that minute to recognize all the folks like our healthcare workers who are working so hard to keep us healthy and safe.
Well,
Thank you.
I mean, it's like the mayor doesn't leave you. The concern for the populace in general, that's just within. Thank you for that. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you really get into politics?
Well, how much time do you have?
Any amount of time.
Well, it's interesting because I really came at politics from being interested in international politics. When I was in undergrad and graduate school, I had the opportunity and the fortune to travel, to spend some time in foreign cultures, and I became fascinated with the way that different cultures interact, and through history, the way that nation states and countries have interacted. I became interested in their policy. I became interested in international treaties and how do those work, what makes the French and Germans different, what has led to the European Union. Europe was actually my focus of study in graduate school. And through that policy lens, I became interested in local politics. Generally for women, it's around an issue. And for me, it was around education because my children entered public school. And I began to see from a parent's eyes what was really happening in public school. And I kept hearing politicians saying the school system was overfunded, there was plenty of money, and I saw something very different on the ground. And I looked around at who was in office and I said, they need to have a mom who understands what's going on with education. And so my first office was a county commissioner because our county commission here in Mecklenburg funds about a third of our schools and has a lot of interaction with the school board on issues of education, on school placement, and support for things like school nurses because the county is also the public health entity. So I ran for county commission and I wanted to have a voice. And that's why I always encourage women who have not traditionally been front and center in the political realm. I always encourage them to run for office because in my studies of political science, what we've seen is that where women have a significant voice, countries around the world and states pay attention to certain issues more, give more resources. And those issues are ones that help all of us. Education, healthcare, climate change, which includes the environment, and housing. And those are good for all of us. But we have seen that women's voices matter, particularly on those issues.
And it's amazing, as you became the mayor of Charlotte, one of your pet projects, I would say, was housing, 5,000 houses that you wanted to get taken care of, built, produced, or however you put it. And you actually have it on schedule. And I understand that it is going to be exceeding your best expectations.
Well, absolutely. What we find in cities across America is that affordable housing is a challenge. Our cities are growing very fast and the real estate values are going up because of the demand. And what this is doing is making it very difficult for many of our workers and residents to afford to live here. And what we firmly believe is that you should be able to afford to live where you work. We know that we have hourly workers who work in our downtown who may have to drive 20 to 30 minutes because it takes that long to find some place they can afford. And that's just not, it's not right. It's also not good for the environment because they're spending that time in a car, maybe with emissions. They're also spending time away from family when they have to live that far out. So Charlotte has made great strides, but I have to say we still have a long way to go. And if you look, especially right now, at some of the tents that are being erected under our bridges, I know every city that I've visited in the last year or so, I've seen a lot of folks who are still homeless. and we need to be even better. I am proud of our accomplishments, but I know there is still work to do. So I'm still doing it, just from a different perspective now as a citizen and an activist.
Well, I actually saw a bit of your activism on a Zoom conference where, there's, I formed a part of a group called Coffee Party. And what we did, it's not a party, it's really a group of people trying to get folks to get together and among different political ideologies, talk and try to find where you could actually come together. And I don't hear that a whole lot, especially in a lot of our either the ultra right or the ultra left space. And I saw you in a particular space where I would not have necessarily expected that sort of a framework. And as I listened to you, it sort of brought back memories of the things that we attempted to build. And then that's when I said I really wanted to speak to you and ask you to be a voice to encourage all of us if we are to attain what we need to attain, especially during a pandemic and beyond. We have to be able to come together. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about how do you see us all coming together to actually fulfill a need? You fulfilled a need in as a mayor of Charlotte. You saw a distinctive need that didn't know blue or red. It was a distinctive need.
Yes, absolutely. But I also know, after having been in office, how important it is to have your residents support you, how important it is to have small businesses, to have families, to have your hourly workers, as well as your CEOs. You want all those folks to be, to understand what the challenges are, to see the big picture, and to help move that policy forward. Because, I mean, take something like housing. The city of Charlotte does not build houses. It gives permitting and it does zoning for multifamily versus residential, et cetera. But developers are the ones who are actually producing that housing stock. And so they have to work together. We have to have government and business work together. Same is true on climate change. We know that cities and their operations are only about 5 to 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions. We have to inspire, encourage, incent, and sometimes regulate business to make sure that it's not polluting, that it is heading the right direction toward a clean energy economy, that it is doing everything possible for energy efficiency. And also, in these solutions, there's something that's very important to me, and this is another place we need the people's voice: equity. We absolutely have been a nation that has overlooked people. We know there was systemic racism in the way we built our cities. We know people were redlined out of prosperity. We know that our healthcare is not equal in terms of access or in practice. We know that people of color are not getting the same treatment, not getting the same diagnosis or the same care. We have statistics and facts and figures that show this. And our role as citizens and residents who see this on the ground and firsthand is to let our policymakers know. I always tell people, your stories are so compelling. Tell your story. You have to use your authentic voice from your perspective, whatever your demographic is, whatever your role is, whether it's as a volunteer or a worker or a working mom or a veteran or a retired person. We need your perspective on what you see happening on the ground. That was so helpful for me in putting together policy that was serving everyone. Because one of the things I emphasized when I was in public office is public means everyone. Public means you don't get to turn people away because they have too many challenges. You don't get to turn people away because you don't like the way they look. You are serving everyone. And you have to serve some people who may not agree with you, who may try to, stymie you at every turn, but you are still there to provide them with health care, with safe streets, with security, with clean air, with some of these things, strong education. Some of these things that we know are really human rights, especially in a developed country, in a post-industrial society. We absolutely have enough for everyone. We just don't have all the doors open yet in the right way to include everyone. So I always encourage people, be authentic, use your voice, tell your story. And I remember budget decisions that we actually changed, both when I was a commissioner and when I was a mayor, because we heard a personal story that we could understand, that touched us, that showed us the impact of policy and budgets. And your budget is a huge measure of what your policy is. So that makes a difference. I have so many examples of where it makes a difference. And I also know when my colleagues would say things like, well, nobody sent me an email or called me about this, so it must be okay. Like everybody must agree with me. They actually believe that. So if you're not, filling up the phone lines or the email inboxes with your reaction to whatever the policy is, they think you're perfectly fine with it. And it's a lot to keep up with because we have local, state, and federal officials, but we absolutely need our residents to be our eyes and ears. And that's what makes democracy work and makes our communities better.
That is such an important message. That message, I mean, you just gave two messages in my humble opinion. One is you gave a litany of progressive policy, progressive voices right there, progressive issues, but then also how important engagement is. In other words, we have a lot of people talk a whole lot about the government never does things right. The government not realizing something that we preach all the time. Government is what again? We, the people. And you just said a magical thing. If a politician does not hear from you, that politician believe they're doing what you expect them to do. And therefore, it is imperative that they hear from you. Now, when I heard you, the other thing that I got within that room that I wanted to sort of get out of you is communication is bidirectional. Right now, I think there are forces that try to keep these poles from interacting. It doesn't, while I don't like to create false equivalences, it is true that both sides, however, sort of are anathema to each other. And my thing is, how do we, first of all, you as a person who is willing to engage, how do you open the door, first of all, let's say on the left, to tell them it is okay, not necessarily to turn the cheek, but it is okay to just sometimes listen?
Well, actually, there is research that shows what helps people engage. And one of the things that you do is you start with people, you build rapport. So if you know what your legislator has worked on in the past, or what their specific interest is, or maybe they have children, and you can say, we're both parents and we both want the best for our kids, and I want to tell you a story about the education my child's receiving, right? So you start with that connection, you start with that rapport. The other thing that people don't do enough is acknowledge and respect a different viewpoint. So when I talk about climate, for example, I will say, I understand not everyone sees this issue the same way. I understand that some people have a challenge with the science, or maybe they're not seeing the impacts in their neighborhood, and so they're confused, or they're not from the same perspective. That I understand that. There's a reason. And what you're doing is you're validating that person's opinion because they're a human being and they've got 5 senses and they've got their own experience. You're validating that. You're saying it's okay that you and I have different viewpoints. But now I'm going to tell you some good things that you will see, because we share some values, that you will see have a good outcome as well. And what we try to stress are, where are the benefits? So when you talk about housing or climate, a couple of things that actually are connected, and you want to again talk about why it's important for people to be able to live close to where they work. You talk about traffic congestion, you talk about air pollution, you talk about spending time away from family. We all have family values. We all believe that parents should spend time with their children. Well, when you're building housing that is only affordable if it's 30 minutes away, you're challenging a lot of those same values. So we can work on housing together to make it to make those options work for everyone. Same is true of climate. We know that clean energy, first of all, it's cheaper. Like wind and solar, nobody pays to like have the sunshine, right? So
Right.
wind and solar are cheaper. It's been shown, you can look at every graph and every financial institution of where wind and solar prices are versus coal and natural gas and other horrible fossil fuels that are polluting our air, damaging our children's lungs. Did you know that African American children are 4 times as likely to have asthma as white children? It's because they often live near highways. These are the areas that have been redlined that have gone through poor communities. They live near asphalt plants. They live in the more polluted parts of town. It has an impact on their health. And that's another value we all share. We all want to have access to good health. We want to have freedom from chronic illnesses. And some of the things that we do to protect our climate are also protecting our health. So why would you not want to do this? Why would you not want to build a future that's better than the one we have now, better than the world we have now? And when you can do that in a way that has benefits for everyone. One more thing, by the way, right now, if you invest in companies that are sustainable, they actually have performed better than companies that don't have sustainable practices. You can look at its ESG investing, you can look at the graphs, you can go to Forbes, you can go to any of those trusted financial sources, and companies that are doing good in the community are also doing well in the stock market. So again, you want to focus on co-benefits, on things that are positive. And you know what? Sometimes it takes a little change to get to that point, because we have infrastructure we've built based on the old ways, based on fossil fuels, based on housing that is 1 acre lots. Well, if you're a growing community, you can't have a bunch of 1 acre lots
No.
because you're going to end up taking up the whole state, right? And no one can get anywhere. So there are a lot of things that have to change, but that change can be directed in a good way that benefits everyone. And it's going to
Great.
be a little disruptive.
Great segue into business. A lot of people think that if you stand for progressive values, that if you stand for these having a good social safety net, that somehow you are anti-business. I have a tenet, first of all, that you decide what social values you cherish, and then you build businesses around what your core values are. That's what I believe. It's not the other way around. You don't build business and then try to get. So I mean, I think having you speak about business as you just did, if you're environmentally honest, if you are socially responsible, that leads to good business as well.
Absolutely. And treating your employees well makes a big difference because, first of all, you don't want them grumbling about you when they get off work, especially if you're a retail company that has a brand that wants to be recognized as caring about people. So you don't want your employees grumbling. You don't want them to not have health care because, as we've seen in this pandemic, we're only as strong as the most vulnerable in our system. So the fact that we have people who are working in meat processing plants that don't have protective equipment, that are working in very unhealthy, dirty conditions, that impacts all of us because that spreads disease. And that is a decision made by an employer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, we're coming up on time here, so I have a specific question about you. I met you on a emergency COVID platform. In other words, we're trying to figure out exactly how best are we going to reinstitute a country after COVID-19. It's going to look quite a bit different than it does right now. What does America in 2021 look like to you?
So America in 2021, I do think we're at a tipping point. And I think that depending on how much people engage and care and understand, we could go either way. So the tipping point is we could fall into autocracy where we have increased gap between rich and poor, between opportunity and lack of opportunity, or we could fall into it's time to rebuild better. It's time to come out of a recession, which we know we're going into, in a way that creates jobs for a sustainable 21st century economy, which means clean energy, smart energy grids, broadband access in rural areas as well as cities. It means an economy that works for everyone. And it means transportation that is efficient, but also fossil fuel free. And there are ways that we can have a green stimulus, which will actually create new opportunities for a healthier future for all. And so if we elect people in 2020, in November, who have the long-term vision in mind, who are thinking about their children and their grandchildren, we know that they're going to care about how we rebuild and how we rebuild in an equitable fashion so we don't have revolution. Because if that separation between rich and poor is too great and too evident and leads to more misery, this country is going to have even worse problems than we have now. I truly believe that we have the opportunity. Somebody said, don't ever miss the opportunity that a crisis presents. And we have an opportunity to rebuild better and stronger and more equitably. But it's going to take people speaking up and showing they care about that equity, that everybody matters and everybody can play a role in making a better future. That's what it's going to take. I'm hopeful. Humans are incredibly resilient, and I'm hopeful we're going to get through this. We're going to see that we're all connected, and we're going to use that to make a better tomorrow.
That has been a tenet of politics done right for some time. We have to make, what I always tell our people as well is, we have to use the sacrifice of now 82,000 lives. We can't come back the way we were. They will be our heroes going forward. Mayor Jennifer Roberts, thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right. With people like you, with you on the team, I am absolutely sure we will get what we need to get done. Thank you so kindly.
Thank you so much for having me, and the best to all your listeners.